I was in Indiana during the last part of the week. My older brother had died last week, and so we were back for a funeral. And it was good to see some family I hadn't seen, honestly, in more than 20 years and get connected. But the funeral was in the morning on Friday, so Vicki and I drove down on Thursday. And Thursday night, went to little Wabash, Indiana. And I'm trying to find supper, right? And so I asked some of the locals, like, where's the best place to get a hamburger? Because every restaurant ought to be able to make a hamburger. And they said, oh, you got to go to the Market Street Grill right downtown Wabash. And so about 9 o'clock that night, we did. They were closing at 9:30, and so we had to rush in. And it was, by the way, the only restaurant in downtown Wabash open at 9 o'clock on a Thursday. And I got in and sat down, and Jama, J-A-M-A, Jama, our waitress, delightful young lady, grew up on a farm outside of Wabash, came over, very friendly, took Vicky's order, came to me and said, all right, what would you like? And I said, well, I see you have here the Market Street Burger, right? It's their house burger. And I said, I'd like that. And she said, great. And she said, I'm new. This is my first week. And so I just want to make sure I understand. And she repeated Vicky's order, got it. Repeated my order, got it. And this Market Street Burger, the only thing is it has a house relish on it. And I'm honestly not a big fan of relish. I think the Lord created hamburgers for you to put mustard and pickle on, and that's about it. And so I just said, Jama, listen, the only thing I would say, you got the order exactly right. I just want a mustard and pickle, so make me that house burger, no relish. She said, yes, sir, got it. And I'm not sure why it took this long, but 10 minutes later, she came back and said, sir, we have a problem. And I said, well, what's the problem? She said, well, we can't make your hamburger with no relish. I said, I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying, Jama. I want the house burger, right, with American and Swiss cheese. I mean, that's a 2-for-1 deal, right? That's good. And I want it with mustard and pickle, but just don't put your house relish on it. That's what she said, yep. And you can't do that. She said, nope. I said, all right, no problem. Well, how about this? Can I have one of the other hamburgers and I'll have mustard and pickle, no relish? She said, no, we can't do. The only hamburgers we got tonight have relish on them. And I said, Jama, I just want to make sure I understand. You can't make a hamburger without relish. No, sir, we can't. Okay. And she handed me back the menu, and I had Santa Fe chicken. And I shouldn't have done this. I'm kind of confessing, right? And she took my order for Santa Fe chicken. I said, now, Jama, I have a question for you. Yes? I said, can you make this exactly as it says here? She said, sir, we can do that. And I had Santa Fe chicken. I tell you that, first of all, because if you are in Wabash, Indiana, go try the Market Street Grill and try the relish burger. I'm sure it's great. Secondly, because, listen, in life, it's frustrating when you can't get what you want. Am I right? Like I know what I want, and I want my burger with mustard and pickle, and I don't want relish on it. And when you can't get it, it's so irritating to me that I come back and tell you a story a few days later. And so as you turn... I am going somewhere with this, I guarantee you. If you turn in your Bibles to 1 Samuel 21, you're going to see hamburger with mustard and... No, I'm just kidding. You're going to find David, man who will soon be king of Israel, in a place where he's very frustrated. And that thing that he wants, he can't have. In fact, let's be honest about 1 Samuel 21. This is, by the way, our 6th week in our study of the life of David. We've already learned that God has called David to lead his people. He's going to be king. Now, there's no doubt in David's mind that the thing for which God has created him, the thing God has called David to do, is to serve God's people by being king. How powerful it is in life to know what it is God's called us to be and to do, and to begin to pursue it. But on David's way to being king, he will spend about a decade of his life on the run, in deep hurt and frustration. Remember last week? He's driven away from his job serving the current king, Saul. He's pursued by that king nearly to his death. If Saul could catch him, he'd kill him. He's driven away from his new wife, Michal. That was a woman's name in the Old Testament. He's driven away from his new wife and under the cover of darkness flees from his very own home. And then we saw last week his precious friendship with Jonathan, best friend in his life, has been severed because Jonathan is King Saul's son. And Saul divides them, and David has to part. At the end of chapter 20, sad words, David flees and he leaves his best friend Jonathan. Where we find David in 1 Samuel 21 is alone. It will be the only time in his life that he is utterly alone. And let me be honest with you. In a time of fear and loneliness, there's only one word for what happens to David, what he does in 1 Samuel 21. Failure. David will fail. There are points in this morning's message where we're going to read the text and you're going to have to shake your head and say, David, David, what are you thinking? Let me summarize, and we'll be in 1 Samuel 21 and 22 this morning. Let me summarize what these two chapters teach us about fulfilling God's calling in our life. It's this: your road to the throne. In other words, God had called David to be king. What is God calling you to be and to do? A single person who honors Him in your life? A husband or a wife? A father, a mother? A godly son? The top of your organization in a way that honors God? What is it God's called you to do? Answer that clearly. David had. King. That's where I'm going. But like David, in our life, your road to the throne leads through adversity, obscurity, and failure. Are you ready to walk that road? Twice in chapter 21, David will fail spectacularly. When given the chance to tell the truth, he'll lie. When given the chance to stand pat and deal with his trouble, twice he'll run away. In both cases, he will bring disaster on his close friends and even on himself. Your road to the throne, you're going to accomplish that thing in life that God has called you to accomplish. Your road to the throne leads through adversity, obscurity, and failure. Question is, are you ready to walk that path? Not going to accomplish in life the things God's called us to accomplish in an easy way. But some of you here today totally get where I'm going. You feel alone. You feel fearful about the future. And you may even be saying, I will never do the thing that I cherish to do. Yes, you will. But your road is going to take you through some dark places. So from 1 Samuel chapter 21, what happens here is a disaster. And it's David's fault. David came to Nob. Nob is not a who, it's a place, it's a city. It was a slightly north and slightly west of Jerusalem. And it was built on a hilltop, and it had become a center of priestly training. In other words, this is where priests went to school to learn how to be a priest. The preachers were taught here, and David came to Nob to Ahimelech the priest. Now, Ahimelech is an influential guy in 1 Samuel. His brother is actually King Saul's personal chaplain, so Ahimelech has all kinds of connections. And David, fleeing for his life, goes to the priest. I mean, if you can't go for to a priest for help, where can you go? And he shows up there one day. And Ahimelech came to meet David trembling and said to him, now wait a minute, something didn't seem right. This Ahimelech's a smart guy. And he's reading what's going on in David's life. Maybe it's written all over David's face, but something doesn't add up. And so look at what happens next. End of verse 1. He said to David, why are you alone and no one with you? Sort of the underlying question is, David, you are the chief of Saul's bodyguard. Why are you here alone? And Verse 2, David said to Ahimelech the priest, the king has charged me with a matter and said to me, let no one know anything of the matter about which I send you and with which I have charged you. Anything specific in there? Does that sound a little, I got this thing I'm supposed to do with these people at this place? Look at the end of the verse, and I've made an appointment with the young men for such and such a place. Listen, guys, when you're looking for if somebody's lying or not, you might want to ask about some details. Question for us. Had King Saul charged David with this task? What's the answer? No. Had David made an appointment to go meet the soldiers somewhere else? No. What do you call that? That's a lie. It's one of those times where you're shaking like, David. Now, let's recognize what's going on in David's life. If there are two words that would describe David's life at this point, I would say this. One, alone. He's been driven from everything he's known. He is one of 8 sons plus however many daughters there were. He's been in a big family, and now he's out on his own. And he's been driven from his job, from his home, from his new wife, and his best friend. And in his loneliness and his fear, he lies to save face. Self-preservation. Look at verse 3, and the priest had no reason to doubt David. He said, well, okay, all right, well, what are you doing here? And so David says, what do you have at hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread or whatever is here. I need some money. And the priest said, well, we don't have any normal bread. We have the bread the priest eats. And as long as you've been behaving yourself, you can have that. And he gives him 5 loaves of that bread. And then David asks a follow-on question. Look at verse 8. David said to Ahimelech, then, have you not here a spear or a sword at hand? For I have brought neither my sword nor my weapons with me because the king's business required haste. Is that true or false? That's false. That's a lie again. You're going to lie to a priest twice? Like, who lies to a priest? That's pretty bad. And David knew that he was asking for a sword because, remember, David was the one who had delivered the sword to the priest. Look at verse 9. The priest said, the sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom you struck down in the valley of Elah, behold, it is here wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. In other words, it's in the back of the store. And, wherever the priest's store was, it's in the back. But if you will take that, take it, for there is none but that here. It's the only sword I've got. This is a priest school. It's not an armory, right? And look at David's. David said, oh, there's none like it. Give it to me. I'll take that one. And now, one verse we skip. Look at verse 7. Okay, what's happened? David, fleeing for his life alone, goes and lies to a priest. He cooks up a story that, the king sent me on business and I need bread and I need weapons. And the priest gives him bread and gives him weapons. One little note. Verse 7, a certain man of the servants of Saul, one man, a certain man, the servants of Saul, was there that day. Where? At Nob, at the priest school. Detained before the Lord. We're not sure what was going on, but he was delayed for some reason. His name was Doeg, the Edomite, meaning he wasn't Israeli. He was from Edom, another kingdom that the Israelis had conquered. And he was the chief of Saul's herdsmen. He kept the property. He ran Saul's agricultural business. That's all we hear. As this is going on, there's a guy who works for Saul watching this. Okay. Now, look at what happens next. Chapter 21, verse 10. I think, personally, this may be about the lowest David will ever get. Again, alone and in fear. David rose and fled that day from Saul and went to Achish, the king of Gath. Wait a minute. Hold on. Let's just see if we kind of get what's happening. Achish is the king of what city? What city did I say? Gath. Anybody remember anything about Gath? That's not Israeli territory. That's Philistine territory. He's going to the enemy. And is there anything else you remember about Gath? Who was the big guy, the giant guy, big guy? Who was from Gath? Who was it? Goliath. Okay, just think with me for a minute. David, your plan is to run away from your problems to a foreign land where the enemies are, and you're going there having killed the most famous guy who ever came from Gath, and oh, by the way, strung across your back is that guy's sword. Not a good, right. This is not a good plan. In fact, look at what happens next. Verse 11, the servants of Achish said to him, that is to Achish, hey, this guy, hey, he's here. And is this not David? And they had some bad information, but David was justly popular. This is the king of the land. Well, not yet, but he will be. And then they said, do you remember that tune they used to play on the radio? Did they not sing to one another of him in dances? Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s? 10,000s of who? Philistines. Ooh, this is a bad guy, and he's right in our hands right now. Okay, David's plan, not so good. And verse 12, now I mentioned what's going on in David's heart. David took these words to heart and was, what are the next two words? Yeah, that's right, much afraid. Driven by fear and loneliness, David's going to lie yet again. In this case, we might call it deceit. He changed his behavior before them and pretended to be insane in their hands. And he made marks on the doors of the gate and let his spittle run down his beard. So you picture this guy raving on the ground, scratching at the door of the king's gate, probably popping off gibberish and drooling and foaming at the mouth. You got to shake your head again. David, you're going to be king. What are you doing pretending to be a madman in a foreign land? I love King Achish's answer to this. It's just, now, will you promise me don't think about where you work when I read this next sentence? Achish said to his servants, behold, you see the man is mad. Why have you brought him to me? Do I lack madmen that you've brought this fellow to behave as a madman in my presence? The guy got enough crazy people around, right? Like I said, don't think about where you work. I'm not thinking about where I work, okay? And shall this fellow come into my house? Like, get him out of here! And what's that like? I mean, you have, what, four soldiers carry raving David and toss him out of the city gate? Chapter 22, verse 1, maybe the very lowest point. And David departed from there and escaped to the cave of Adullam. It's back in Israeli territory. It is, it's lonely. In fact, the word Adullam means a tight place, a narrow space. David is alone, and David is in a tight spot. Alan Redpath makes a great observation at this point. Writing of David, he says, here was David, chosen to be king, destined to be master over great lands and wealth, but living in exile, begging for bread. Anointed by the Spirit of God, but running for his life from his enemies and destitute of all his friends. It's a great observation. So often the providence of God seemed to run completely counter to his promises. But only that he may test our faith. Only that he may ultimately accomplish his purpose for our lives in a way that he could never do if the path was always smooth. It is when the problems and difficulties seem to be overwhelming that the man of God learns some lessons that he could never learn otherwise. Are you there? You know what I mean? Some of you may find yourselves in a cave alone, figuratively, I hope. Blocked from accomplishing the things in life you wanted to accomplish, betrayed by those closest to you, feeling farther than ever from God. We need to recognize it's at that point that God does his best work. And nothing about your circumstances will stop you from accomplishing that thing God has called you to do. As a matter of fact, it is in the cave in chapter 22 where David at the very bottom begins a dramatic turnaround, and God leads the way on that. So Let's see if we can't dig David out of the pit he's dug for himself. Look at chapter 22, verse 1. And as the Lord often does, it's in the most unusual way that he begins his restoration process in David's life. David departed from there and escaped to the cave of Adullam. And when his brothers and his father's house heard it, they went down there to him. Now that's good. A mom and dad and brothers and sisters, they all start showing up. There's this line of people that begin to show up at the cave. When you're alone, it's nice to have some people around you. Now, there are others that show up too. Look at verse 2. And everyone who was in distress, the word means to be pressured. And everyone who was in debt, and it's a technical word for those who were escaping from the debt collector. These were people declaring bankruptcy by fleeing the scene of their indebtedness. And everyone who was bitter in soul, it's a pretty strong word. Everyone who had a beef with somebody else, everyone who was angry with someone, they showed up there and they gathered to him. Now think about that. You're maybe at the lowest point in your life and your mom and dad and brothers and sisters show up. That's pretty good. Well, for most of us, that's pretty good, right? And then following after that is every angry, disappointed, bitter, welcher on their debt. Every guy in Israel is flowing down to him. How's that sound for your team? But look. Look what David does. And he became captain over them. I love that. I love that David didn't make excuses. He did something with the circumstances in which he found himself. And how about this? And there were with him about 400 men. Wow! And in the next paragraph, God really begins to turn David around. Because for the first time in several chapters, we hear from the Lord. What's conspicuously absent in chapter 21 is any word from God to David. David is alone. He's fearful, and he doesn't take the time to seek God. What does God say about my circumstance? So look at verse 5. The prophet Gad said to David, "Do not remain in the stronghold, depart, go into the land of Judah." This is now twice David has run away from his problems into another land, and God speaks through his prophet, "David, your future lies in Israel, not in the wilderness. Go back home." And look at the end of verse 5. Obedience always is the right thing. David departed and went into the forest of Hereth. This is in the south of Israel. It's in the wilderness, but David's back home. And the rest of chapter 22 is brutal reading. Saul hears that this priest Ahimelech has helped David. And remember, David lied to the guy. Ahimelech's totally innocent. And in a red rage, Saul executes Ahimelech. He kills a priest. And if that's not enough, he kills Ahimelech's family, and then he sends his soldiers to go devastate and burn to the ground and kill every living thing in the city of Nob. And he destroys the school of the priests. I mean, Saul is crazy with revenge. And look at verse 20 of chapter 22. One of the sons of Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled to David. Now, we don't know. We think Abiathar was fairly young. Abiathar will be with David throughout the rest of his life. And so David reigned for 40 years, so we know Abiathar is probably a young man. Look at verse 21. And Abiathar told David that Saul had killed the priests of the Lord. Stop for a minute before you read that next verse. If you're David, how do you feel? Well, look at the next verse. Verse 22, David said to Abiathar, "I knew on that day when Doeg the Edomite was there, I knew that he would surely tell Saul, 'I have occasioned the death of all of the persons of your father's household.'" In some way, Abiathar, I'm to blame for what happened to your dad and your uncles. And you know what that's called? That's called ownership. David lied, and others paid a heavy price. And right here to the lone survivor of that family, David owns that. And then he extends his protection. Stay with me. Do not be afraid. How does that word sound coming from a man who spent the last months living in total fear? Stay with me. Do not be afraid, for he who seeks my life seeks your life. With me you shall be in safekeeping. God begins to rebuild David's life. Those 400 men who come to him angry and bitter and debtors become the nucleus of David's army that will conquer all the surrounding nations. His mighty men grow out of this list of people. Chapter 23 is about David running again. He's running for his life. He gets a great battle. He's betrayed after that battle by the very city he saves. And look at chapter 23, verse 24. Here's the closing scene of really this section of David's life. By this point, some things have happened to David. He's not alone. He's not in fear. He's got some support behind him, and he begins to win some battles and some victories. But the threat is still there. 1 Samuel 23:24, and they arose and went to Ziph ahead of Saul. This is David is running. He's fleeing from King Saul. David and his men were there in the wilderness of Maon in the Arabah, the south of Jeshimon. Where's that at? I don't know, but it's way far south. It's way out in the boonies. It's out there where there's no maps and no roads and no GPSs will find you there. And Saul and his men went to seek him, and David was told. So he went down to the rock and lived in the wilderness of Maon. And when Saul heard that, he pursued David in the wilderness of Maon. So where David had used to be able to escape, now Saul's saying, nope, I'm pressing through. And as far as we know, he has thousands of soldiers with him. And David has 400. Look at verse 26. Man, I just love the picture the scriptures paint. This is like something out of an adventure novel, out of a war book. I mean, they're pressing in on David. And verse 26, Saul went on one side of the mountain, and David and his men went on the other side of the mountain. And David was hurrying to get away from Saul. So you can hear the chariot wheels, you can hear the clomp of the hoofs of the horses and the donkeys, and whatever they're pulling, boy of armor. And David, he's just beating a path of retreat. And Saul is closing in on him. And we think what's happened when it says one side of the rock and the other. Saul has divided his men, and he's going to get David in a pincer move and destroy him. Whew. The odds are against him. At the very time where it seems like things are turning, now you have the greatest threat to his life. He's threatened. God steps in. Look at the end of verse 26. As Saul and his men were closing in on David and the men to capture them, a messenger came to Saul saying, hurry, come, for the Philistines have made a raid against the land. Well, the enemy has taken this opportunity. The army cleared out of your area, Saul, and now the Philistines have cleared in. You got to come take care of this. And so Saul returned from pursuing after David and went against the Philistines. Therefore, that place was called the Rock of Escape. I love that. David's like, I'm going to name this place. That's the rock where I made my escape. And in verse 29, David went up from there and lived in the strongholds of En-Gedi. En-Gedi was a rocky crag on the shores of the Dead Sea. Literally, it means it's the place where the baby goats can skip along the rocks. That's a mouthful, right? And David's going to live in the wilderness among the caves, but he is secure there from Saul. And so just a lot going on. So what are our lessons? What do we take away from David's experience in the wilderness and his failure, but his restoration? And so let me give you this crucible of testing, again from Alan Redpath. This crucible of testing was to prepare David for a throne for which he had already been chosen. I want you to understand that what is happening to David at this point is all in the will of God. I mean, think about that. Being pursued within an inch of your life. This was all in the will of God to make of him a man of God. Now, I love this last phrase is words to live by. It takes but a moment to make a convert. It is the work of a lifetime to manufacture a saint. This is what God is doing in your life. Not content with where you are, God is driving you, leading you, preparing you for that thing you're going to accomplish in life. So, if you're feeling under the gun, alone, a desperate, a fearful, let me draw some life lessons for us from David's experience. First is this: when you are desperate, do not lie. When you're desperate, don't lie. I get it. It's self-preservation. I get it. It's like, I can get my way out of here by lying. Listen, no, you can't, and neither can I. There's one thing the Lord taught me the last 20 years observing my family, and I'm talking about my extended family, is that living a lie takes you to a very bad place. We refuse to deal with difficult things in our lives, that's not only going to hurt us, that's going to hurt our children and our grandchildren after us. It may be that sitting here today, some of you need to have a conversation with someone close to you. When David made it right with Abiathar, he took ownership and he took responsibility. In fact, he took Abiathar under his own care. That restoration process began. I'm saying, husbands, it may be time to sit down with our wife and be honest. Wives, it may be time to sit down with your husband and tell the truth. Teenagers, maybe it's time to have a conversation with what's been going on in your life and the thing you fear being found out about, and have that talk with your mom and dad. And risk trusting them. And I would suggest to you that you would find them to be loving and helpful and likely to take you under their care during a difficult time. We will not get better by lying about our circumstances. Constant battle in my life has had as an adult has been to overcome the desire to please people all the time. Sometimes to cover things up to do that. God is doing a transforming work continually in my life on that. Scott, tell the truth. And that has been such a blessing in my family, in my marriage, and in my relationship with my kids. Will you gently and graciously risk that? When you're under the pressure, when you're desperate, bite your tongue for a minute before you say something that easily rolls off and says, that really what happened was, and I'm on a secret mission and I need some bread. David might have been able to tell the truth, and maybe the priest would have said, listen, David, you need to go hide out there. I can't help you, but it would have spared that priest's life and David's integrity. Second, when you are discouraged, don't withdraw. I see this over and over in church life, and I can speak out of my experience, I can't speak out of yours. But as a pastor who loves the people of God and loves this church, I have seen people get in difficult circumstances in their own lives, in relationship with others, on their job, whatever, and you begin to see the pattern of withdrawal. And they forsake their small group, or they forsake their church, or they forsake attending a congregation where they can actually hear something to encourage them. Whether it be by a mistaken thought of I'll be embarrassed, or there are people who think poorly of me, or don't withdraw when you're discouraged. This may come across as sounding harsh. I don't mean it that way, but I'm telling you, you should not care what someone else thinks about that. You should be absolutely driven to find the help required to get you through this. And when God sent some people to David, he accepted that help. Charles Swindoll, terrific writer, on this whole issue of those crusty, cranky guys coming to see David in the cave, makes a great observation. David was beaten all the way down until there was no way to look but up. And when he looked up, God was there bringing this bunch of unknowns to him little by little until finally they proved themselves to be the mightiest men in Israel. Wow, Swindoll writes. What a turning point in David's life when he made the crucial decision not to walk away, not to withdraw. He would accept his situation and make the best of it. If it was a cave, so be it. If those around him needed leadership, he'd provide it. Who would have ever guessed that the next king of Israel was training his troops in a dark cave where nobody saw and nobody cared? How unusual of God. And yet that is exactly how God planned it. Here's where David was, Psalm 142. Let me read it to you. You don't have to turn there, I've got it. But here's the title. A Song of David when he was in the cave. Here's what David composed there by himself, alone. Psalm 142. With my voice I cry out to the Lord. With my voice I plead for mercy. I pour out my complaint to him. I tell my trouble before him. Look to the right and see, there is none who takes notice of me. No refuge remains for me. This is a sad verse, verse 4. No one cares for my soul. That's how he felt. Verse 6, attend to my cry, for I am brought very low. Deliver me from my persecutors. They are too strong for me. Bring me out of prison that I may give thanks to your name. Don't withdraw. Now is the time for you to pursue relationships like never before. Find, if it's only one, find that one, a godly man, a godly woman, and you pour out your heart, and then you keep your mouth shut and listen to what they say. Third, when you are threatened, don't quit. When you're threatened, don't quit. The thing I love about David was how resilient, or maybe the word is how resolute he was. Even after failure, and I'm talking about disastrous failure, lying and leaving, fibbing and fleeing, in the cave, he turned and wrote a song to God, and God began to send his turnaround plan. And David began to take little steps, but steps toward recovery, restoration. Don't quit. When this church was nothing but an idea in my mind and the hearts of several of our folks who are with us still, the church where I pastored at the time that was going to do this church plant, we had the discussion and put to a vote, do we go ahead and plant a church here? And I walked in that day, and there was some fear about the unknown, the future. Joe, one of our elders, you remember that. You were there that day in 2000. And I walked in, and I saw a slip of paper on the back, the church where I was pastoring had pews, on the back pew. And I picked it up, and it was a ballot that we were going to vote on that day. And it was marked no. I thought, And so I gathered a few of our church leaders around there and I said, hey, I found this. What do you think? What we found out is that someone who had opposed the move had pre-marked all the ballots no. And was handing them out to the people. That's a pretty high level of opposition. Of course, I also thought, this is Chicago, right? I just remember that morning thinking, you know what, Lord? It just might not be worth it. It's how preachers think sometimes on Sunday mornings, right? When they find out somebody's deceived and trying to work against you. I had some encouragement from people around me, and we actually ran down to the copier and printed off ballots that were not pre-marked no. And And 95% of the people that day voted, let's plant a church. And you're all sitting here, and I'm pretty darn happy that we did. Can I plead with you not to quit when you face the threats? Maybe the threat you feel right now looks really dark. You feel like you're in the cave. Quitting's the wrong thing. But don't do that. Let me invite our worship team back here to lead us in a closing song. And while they're on the way, can I read to you a song that David wrote during this season of life? And it has a very different feel than Psalm 142 that was written in the cave. This is likely a song that David wrote from the perspective of later years when he didn't quit. Psalm 34 says this: I sought the Lord, and He answered me, and delivered me from all of my fears. This poor man cried, and the Lord heard him, and saved him out of all of his troubles. Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man who puts his refuge in Him. Oh, fear the Lord, you His saints, for those who fear Him have no lack. The eyes of the Lord are toward the righteous, and His ears toward their cry. When the righteous cry for help, the Lord hears and delivers them out of all their troubles. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit. Many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivers him out of them all. Let me pray for you. Father, I pray for men and women listening, those who are under the gun or feeling like they're in the cave or they're alone or they've really been overwhelmed by circumstances. Father, I pray they would embrace the truth as their most powerful weapon. I pray they would find friends to be near them. God, I pray they would absolutely refuse to surrender their faith in You. They would not quit pursuing that thing You've called them to pursue. God, I pray as a church we would be a congregation made up of men and women who have failures in our past but hope for our future. God, I pray that the power of Jesus Christ to forgive and make new would strengthen us. Lord, I pray for any who do not know Jesus Christ in a personal way as their Lord, as their Savior, that they might believe that He is the ultimate deliverer. He died on the cross and rose again for the sins of the world. And when I believe that, I ask Jesus Christ to forgive and be my Lord. I am made right. So, Father, I pray that Your grace would be in evidence here in our lives, the life of this church. And, Father, will You bless the needs represented here today, I ask. In the name of Jesus, our Savior, I pray this. Amen.